Thanks so much, everyone, and it's so great to be here. I also feel very lucky. I feel like I feel a lot better than Judy does, because Judy, it sounded like wherever you are, you're not maybe feeling so well, so I hope you're feeling better soon. Admittedly, I think this spot in the day was initially reserved for the minister, so I acknowledge I must be a little bit of a disappointment, a keen second best. And actually, to mitigate that, I had booked someone really spectacular to join me at the podium for today's presentation, but Chris Hadfield had to cancel at the last minute, so you're stuck with me. And I did notice, actually, that the first, you started the day with a talk about happiness, and you're ending the day with a talk about poverty, and maybe that could have been switched. I apologize to be here grappling with a tough topic. But in all honesty, I really, really love coming and sharing ideas with municipal colleagues. I always learn so much. My perspective always changes when I do, and I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to chat with you a little bit about the poverty reduction strategy, or what I'll be calling the PRS. So just a little bit in terms of the next few minutes, very informal. I know you'll be very disappointed to hear I did not bring a PowerPoint presentation. I'll talk for a few minutes, and hopefully there'll be time to answer questions. I do have a tendency to talk really fast. I know we're a little pressed for time. Maybe that will serve us well, but I'll try to keep my speed under wraps. I hope to sort of cover two key things in the next few minutes. The first is to give you a little bit of an overview of what we've been up to for the past few months, and then, as best I can, talk a little bit about what happens now. And many of you will have heard me make this unfortunate disclaimer before, and I apologize given the timing of things, and that we haven't yet been to cabinet, and we're literally in the throes of it all. I am somewhat limited in terms of what I can talk about, but as some of you will know about me, I will do my absolute very best to be as forthright as possible, cover as much ground as possible, to be as helpful as possible in the time that we have. And I'll also, if there's time, answer any questions, so we might be able to dig a little deeper if I don't cover things off in my remarks. So some of you might know I'm a passionate student of the martial arts, so fighting is in my nature. And one of the greatest fighters of all time, Muhammad Ali, has a wonderful quote that I think really typifies the work that we've been doing over the past few months. He said, "Wars against nations are fought to change maps. Wars against poverty are fought to map change." As all of you know far better than I do, and I really mean that, poverty is an extremely complex issue, and the efforts to address it are similarly so. And the change to which Muhammad Ali refers takes an incredibly long time to realize. For me personally, along with my fighting nature, I'm extremely impatient, so this reality for me is a very difficult part of my work at the moment. As Janet mentioned, many of you will know me from the long-term affordable housing strategy, so I really wanted to acknowledge that, and related to the video, the wonderful video we just saw a few minutes of, I really wanted to acknowledge the work that I know has been going on the housing and homelessness plans. I know many of you have been nose to the grindstone on that work for a very long time, and I'm sure within them across the province there are some wonderful maps for change that we'll see in the next few weeks, and I really wish you well in those efforts. Also, as Janet mentioned, a few months ago I was asked to put together a tiny team to develop a new PRS, and that's what I'll be chatting with you about for the next few minutes. But before I get into it, a couple reminders. In 2008, we had the first poverty reduction strategy with the province. Part of that strategy was a piece of legislation that required the government to renew its strategy every 5 years, and that's what we're in the middle of right now. We're also required to develop that new strategy through extensive consultation, and that's what we were up to for much of August and September this past summer. That Poverty Reduction Act was a really seminal piece of work. And I just wanted to take a few minutes to acknowledge all of you in the room, any of you in the room who had anything to do with that piece of legislation. It remains a historical piece of legislation and truly a map for change for all of us, and something I'm very proud of as an Ontarian. We'll all remember in last year's budget, or maybe not all of us, but just a reminder, that the Premier did recommit to a new strategy this year. She created a cross-government cabinet committee in order to help facilitate doing that. And then some of you may well have seen in the recent fall economic statement a reconfirmation of those efforts. So what have we been up to? Primarily a lot of consultation and a lot of policy thinking, some mind-melding days of work, many of which were shared with many of you in the room. We commissioned a research paper, which was written by the Mowat Center, and its focus was on innovations since the last strategy. And I am extremely hopeful that that paper will be made public and we can all benefit from its insights. But that was something that the Cabinet Committee was very interested in, a third-party perspective on poverty interventions from an Ontario perspective. We also conducted market research in order to get a little bit of a sense of general public perspectives on poverty, as well as their perspectives on various interventions. We, of course, conducted extensive in-person consultations across the province. This was an unusual approach because these sessions were led by members of the Cabinet Committee on Poverty Reduction and Social Inclusion. Usually when you do a consultation, it's one ministry, one minister, and you sort of truck across the province. But this time it was led by 15 different, or actually more than that, because some of them were done collectively, cabinet members in many different communities. We also did 4 sector-specific sessions, which tried to focus on key sectors and perspectives on poverty interventions related to those. Just very, very quickly, because you might be interested, I'll run through the list extremely quickly. Windsor, London, Ottawa, Brampton, Toronto, Hamilton, Kingston, Peterborough, Guelph, St. Catharines, Kitchener, Scarborough, Sault Ste. Marie, Thunder Bay, and Mississauga. Then of the 4 sector sessions, 3 of them were in Toronto: newcomers, business, and off-reserve Aboriginal First Nations, and then in Thunder Bay, on-reserve First Nations. We also conducted consultations through an online survey. We, of course, received formal written submissions, and we also struck a technical advisory group. And for those of you who have worked with me in the past, you'll know that this is something I'm a huge fan of. They're roll up your sleeves, sweat through the day, grapple with really tough issues kind of sessions. And I just want to thank, in the room, Petra Wolfbeis was on our core membership, Jennifer Laidley was on our core membership, Jennifer Postumus from City of Toronto joined us many times, and Lynn Randall, I don't know if you're here, but you were our AMO rep, and we were incredibly grateful. Pretty much all of you attended all 4 of our all-day grueling policy conversations, and for that I'm incredibly grateful. So by numbers, consultation by numbers, I'm very passionate about numbers, and I always like to sort of boil things down. We reached around 1,000 people with our in-person consultations. We had 10 different technical advisory group sessions with over 90 people participating. There were over 1,000 participants in our market research and over 1,000 online surveys submitted, almost 200 submissions by email, and 1,300 visitors to our website and 1,600 downloads of our consultation document. There were also community-led sessions, and many of you were involved in those, and there were 10 of those, many of which then submitted formally something to the government. So what did we hear? I've collected together the kinds of consistent things we heard across all channels, But trust me, we have tomes and tomes and tomes of information, so you will notice this is barely scratching the surface, and I apologize for that, because there are many, many, many really legitimate and worthwhile issues I'm not going to mention in the next few minutes, but just trying to summarize the kinds of things we heard across all channels. Number one, jobs, economy, unemployment, and healthcare remain the highest ranked issues, both in consultation and through market research. There also was widespread support for the poverty reduction strategy. That's not to say that everybody felt we got it right, or it went far enough, or it was exactly how it should be, but by and large, not just among sector folks or government folks, but even the public acknowledged that a poverty reduction strategy is a very important thing. And that was important, I think, for government to hear. Also, we heard largely that people wanted us, or felt that government should focus such a strategy on all Ontarians. The first strategy focused primarily on children, and there was a lot of feedback that that was good and worthwhile, and that needs to, the efforts in that regard are important and need to continue, but there's a whole host of other folks who are currently living in poverty who really are desperate for help. Excuse me. Also, improving jobs and skills training. Interestingly enough, we consistently heard that this is a really important intervention. Now, I'll be the first to acknowledge that employment, and jobs are not a panacea for poverty at all, and there are many people for whom that isn't necessarily a solution, but it was interesting how often we did hear that across communities in the province. So what does it mean for us in this room today? I don't need to tell any of you that a siloed approach to any of these solutions doesn't work. We know that poverty is a multifaceted issue, and we know that any types of interventions need to similarly reflect that kind of complexity. Locally tailored solutions, we know, and we heard, are much better than ones implemented from high above without a real appreciation for the issues on the ground. And I'm sure you've been focusing on all day, and Janet mentioned, or maybe it was Judy, I think it was Judy actually, the focus on partnership. That real fundamental need to collaborate, coordinate, and integrate support services is something that we're really talking about in terms of the most effective interventions. We also know we have to create better linkages across systems and also remove barriers. We know that we have unintended structures and processes that really limit what's possible. And we also know that we have to be innovative in terms of thinking about interventions, and that historically perhaps we haven't necessarily been so. And finally, and perhaps most importantly to this room, something we're talking a lot about is the really important role of communities, municipalities, organizations in helping shape what's possible and the most effective solutions to challenges in communities. So one of our key areas of focus in developing a new strategy has been explicitly about community collaboration and local solutions. And that encompasses a whole host of things, but think of it as thinking about ways to foster and develop collaboration amongst different levels of government, the business sector, community organizations, individuals with lived experience, families, children, etc. And also think of it as ways to explore pilots or taking risks in addressing some of the most vulnerable populations in the greatest and deepest need. But of course, that's not all we're thinking about. I've already mentioned the focus on children. We're grappling with what's the right place to focus. Should that change? What are the risks with doing that? And if it were to change, where might we focus? We've been debating theme. For example, I mentioned a real focus on jobs and economy and access to the labor market. And should that be something we should, hone in on? We've also been talking a lot, of course, about what we've been calling direct supports or income security explicitly, and how do you balance that against indirect supports or things like, for example, housing and homelessness interventions, which Judy was just talking about, or, for example, low-income health benefits. And how do you do all of that without a robust and healthy data culture in terms of use, collection, and even dissemination of that data? There's a gajillion other things we're talking about and thinking about, but those are some of the ones that we're grappling with. We know we're not going to be able to solve it all. That's something that many of you who were on the technical advisory group with me will know I sweated about and cried about and struggle with every day. But really, I'm hoping to be as bold and as brave in our ideas and our language as possible to lay the foundation for truly landmark strategies, not just now, but in the future, and to really map change for Ontario. And those are my hopes for our next and future strategies. So what's next? Some of you will know there's a requirement to report annually on the poverty reduction strategy, and we're in the last year of the first strategy, so there'll be an annual report on the last strategy, and I would expect to see that in the next few weeks. Obviously, the next piece is the development of a new strategy, and that work has been ongoing for the last several weeks and will continue for the next few weeks, and I would expect to see a new poverty reduction strategy in the next few months in winter or very early spring 2014. So in conclusion, and hopefully we can have some questions, thank you for having me here today. I know I couldn't get into the real issues, and that's not because I don't want to, but I'm happy to come back in a little bit and we can chat in more detail about where we did land. There's so much more work ahead, but please don't be shy. If you have ideas or questions, don't hesitate to email me directly, melissa.thomson@ontario.ca. There's no P in my last name. And otherwise, I really look forward to continuing to work together to very impatiently map change for the province of Ontario. So thank you so much. Happy to take questions.